Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we are going to get a primer on how to architect epic Angular applications in less than 10 minutes. I know our show is an hour long, so we'll have to figure out ways to discuss the other 50 minutes, but I'm sure we got it covered. No problem. Let's say hi to our panelists, and then we'll meet our guests, and we'll get into the topic. Joining us today, we've got Alyssa with us. Alyssa, how's it going?
Hello, so glad to be here.
Glad to be back. Glad to have you. All right, Bonnie's with us. Bonnie, how's it going?
It's great. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot of fun tonight. Justin's trying to get us all to be serious so we can go live, and Liz and I are giggling over here, and our guest is just egging us on, and I think it's really going to be a very fun show tonight. I just have a feeling.
For sure. They're all fun, right? So
They
always
are.
excited. All right, our guest today is Tomas. Tomas, how's it going?
Hi, thank you. Very good, thank you.
We are very excited to have you here and to help us understand how to architect epic Angular apps in a quickly, right?
We will try, right? We will try. We will see.
For sure, for sure. Oh, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what you got going on?
Of course. So hello, everyone. My name is Tomas Trajan, and I am like a Google developer expert for Angular. Currently, I am living and working in a beautiful Switzerland as a contractor for like local enterprises. This comes also with some perks like being able to see like a lot of organizations and a lot of projects, which kind of gives you opportunity to like experience different ways of people doing things, and also gives you like this learning experience when you can then put all these things together and share with others. So for me, it's like a very good match, let's say. And yeah, like besides that, like I'm active on Medium. That means I have there a blog. So if you are interested in Angular topics, feel free to check it out. It's like all my accounts are basically like Tomas Trajan. So at Tomas Trajan on whatever platform, GitHub, Medium, Twitter. So there is like a lot of Angular and front-end related content. But of course, like the biggest focus is on Angular, which I'm been going together with like since version 1.1 or something like this. So it's obviously my favorite technology.
Yeah. Awesome. That leads me to think like the clients that you're working with now, do you still see a lot of Angular JS out there in play, or do you see a lot of movement already to Angular?
So this is a very good question. Like my current client is a pretty big insurance company here in Switzerland, and we have been in progress of migrating AngularJS code bases and we are still actually in progress because it was a lot of code. But I have to say, like in like last year, we made a lot of progress, and now it's like most of the applications are at least hybrid, and even I would say 60% are pure even. So slowly, it still takes some time and it has like issues, but it's happening.
I'd be interested to find out, like, are the teams that you're working with, did they write that AngularJS code and now they're writing Angular code and have to, and what is the differences in terms of now they have to go and relearn architecture patterns, right? These type of things as they adapt to implementation within Angular scope, right?
That's exactly correct. So mostly like those people were writing this AngularJS code, and now they are kind of rewriting. And as you said, like it's not actually like mechanical, like, okay, we have like this version like this, and now it's like kind of the same. We just change a little bit of syntax. It's actually like we have to change the way we approach this. There are like different idioms, different approaches. Now it's reactive and so on. So of course, this presents like a learning curve and like challenges. But I have to say, like over time, you can see like how people actually like really level up. So they do the first one, then you're like, nah, okay, like let's have a look at this. Let's review more often, and then like the second one, okay, like this seems more reasonable, and like it builds up, of course, like with everything. So yeah, definitely. And of course, as much as it gets like purer and purer, many of the issues like with ng upgrade, which just adds additional complexity like fall out. So this is also very beneficial. So I can give you like a concrete example. For example, like with Angular 5, you didn't yet have like this provided in root syntax. So because of that, then we got these issues where you are like importing some modules which have services in lazy loaded features, you would get additional instances of those services. And if you are dealing with something like a translation service, which has to be instantiated once to get like all the translations at once and not like then miss them later on when you get a new instance, you get runtime bugs and stuff like this. So once you are pure and once you have like Angular 6 Plus, these kind of things cannot happen anymore. So it gets better with time and with newer versions, newer features, and so on.
Yeah, one of the challenges I think that we face is that there's several different ways to accomplish the same thing, and they'll work, right? And you can ship that code to production and it'll work. So like the provided is a good example, right? Like you could have it provided in a specific ng module and have it only provided once and it behaves similar same way, right? But how do you pick and how do you identify maybe the most ideal way for your project in terms of an architecture standpoint that you're going for to set you up not only for success currently, but for success as new features come in later, right?
That's a very good observation. And that's exactly basically bridging us to the main topic, which is like how to kind of figure out how to do these things in such a way which is kind of like in the direction of optimal. You can never say like 100% this is the best way. Okay, this is not the goal, but you try to approach the optimal solution which will give you most benefits and like provide like least amount of obstacles, right? So this is what we try to achieve. And again, you will never know for sure, but if you've seen enough projects and like you've seen like different use cases, then you can kind of like deduce from this, like, okay, this seems to be working better and this seems to be working less. So with this particular example, which you mentioned, like it is possible to provide services in both like the providers fields of the module, but it's also possible to provide services in this like standalone mode, which is like provided in root. And now even like since Angular 9, it's even possible to provide services like in the platform or even like any. So, and they, of course, they have their own particular use cases, but if we now focus like on these base ones, so the root and the module itself. So on one hand, we can have a standalone service class, which at injectable decorator has this provided in root. On the other hand, we can have a service which just have at injectable without anything special, and then it has to be included in the provider's array of some module, right? So these are like these two basic options. And now how can we know what we should choose? So actually it turns out that there is a how do you say, heuristic or something where you can actually make this decision and be quite confident about it. So first question you should be asking yourself is this service used by the whole application or like by many features or like in many routes? Is this service necessary from the start? And if any of those questions have a yes answer, then most likely you should go with provided in root and put this service in some like core module. I mean, not even in the module itself because it's provided in root, but like in the core folder or like in the services folder in the root of your project, because it will be used in many places. It has to be available from start. On the other hand, if you have a feature specific service, so for example, if you have a I don't know, like how do you say, like the shopping basket feature, and maybe you want to calculate like the total or whatever it is, then probably this kind of service has a very specific use case. So most likely it will be only used in that feature. And more so, usually we make this feature lazy loaded so that we improve like the startup time of our application and decrease the bundle size of the application, initial bundle size, and other things which we'll discuss later. So that means if we provided this service in a root, any other feature could import it easily, and we would like to prevent that to enforce like a clean architecture, right? So in that case, it would be much more beneficial to, instead of using provided in root, just provide this service into the provider's field of that feature module. So that's like one of the examples where you can ask these questions, think about it, and come with like explicit answer which is based on something. So it's not just subjective preference. One can say that one is better than the other. So this is pretty useful. I hope.
I always say I've been doing consulting also for a couple of years. And I always say I'm like Mary Poppins because I go from one company to another, and I see the same things over and over and over, and I see the same mistakes over and over and the same patterns over and over. And it does get to where to me, I think that's the essence of architecture, is when you've seen the same things over and over and over, and you can pick out, well, this is how we're going to do it because I've come across this before. And it's so nice to have it distilled down into something that people can learn from before they have all that experience. Because it's like you take all these years of experience and just distill it down into like a short presentation. It's super helpful.
Definitely.
And you have an article that goes. So I was reading this article a couple weeks ago. I think it was last month or something, and I really liked it. So I pinged you on Slack, and I was like, "Hey, come on AngularAir and talk about this." And I love it. And I love the fact that there's an article too, because we can watch the video and then also refer back to the article. But we're not going to give you the link yet because you have to watch the show first and then go read the article. But there is an article, so you don't have to remember all this. Yeah, you got to watch the show first.
Nice.
Yeah.
Bonnie, our head of our marketing team here. We're on track.
Because I don't want him to leave now and go. I'm just kidding. I probably should. We'll tweet it out, you guys. It's fine.
So one of the things that both of you touched on that I think is interesting and important, right, is this mention of we may be building our own app, right? Let's say we've got an app and all we have is the app and the modules that support it. And so we're scoped to that kind of thinking and architecture. But then at some other point, a larger scale business or something like that may have their application broken out into libs and maybe have multiple applications, right? And the need to reuse those libs. And so those different use cases and being exposed to those different ones, as you both mentioned in terms of being consultant and contractor to go and do those certain things, allows you to identify, well, here's where this comes into play, right? And here's the things you need to think about. And Tomas, like you mentioned, like trying to understand where you might be going to help plan where you might want to do today. Having that experience and having come across those scenarios helps to make that decision from an architecture level, right? I think a lot of people, and myself included, you dive into architecture and you start thinking, well, how do I get these answers? Like, where do I even start? But I think a lot of that comes from exposure to different scenarios that allows you to then make that game plan, right?
It's very hard to like come to these things like without seeing it or trying it out, and it just takes time and exposure because like it's a complex topic. Of course, it has like many moving parts, and then like okay, you can try to code something at home, but that's like one use case or something. But then this is why it's beneficial like to be in bigger organizations. It has its own disadvantages, of course. They are like slow and they have a lot of processes and so on, of course. But on the other hand, they easily can have 50 to 100 projects, and that way you can really be exposed to a lot of different style. Like some is very small, it's just like something which opens up when somebody clicks on email link to like fill some form. Okay, some are like huge with a lot of flows, with complicated flows and huge forms. So like it's the whole spectrum. That's true. That's definitely true. And I mean, if you like try to learn these kind of things and like want to get more experience, then I think like also in open source you can see some things, even though that's more like on the level of the libraries, but it's also like a very good source of like checking, for example, as you mentioned, like how to do a library so that it's like easy to consume. So for this is open source is amazing. For example, right now we are building like our internal component framework. So like this kind of like to design system to make it look like company specific and using multiple projects. And it is in Angular, so we are taking heavy inspiration from Angular material, because this is a library which is used by tens of thousands or even, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people. It's out for many years. They already have been thinking for that in combined like million hours. So of course we take inspiration from that. So there is like a lot of sources you can use which are out there, which you can get inspiration and see like, okay, this is how they solve this thing. And this is why they solved it like this, because it's fixing some like use case. Right?
Yeah. So you mentioned some strategies around services, right? What else can we do in terms of in 10 minutes?
Right. So I mean, let's start like from the total root. So we have like an application, right? We have Angular application, and what would be like the most straightforward approach? Like if we were not thinking about architecture at all, we just want to get our app up and running, right? So this is also valid. We have to get something quickly. It's pretty small. So what would be like this most straightforward way to get this is that we will have one module. We will have app module, because that's which every application starts with when we generate it with Angular CLI with ng new. We have app module, we have app component. And then as it grows, we would just keep implementing all these new components and services in our app module. So everything will be there. If we will be using like some third-party dependency, we will also import it in our app module. So that means if you use like Angular Material or whatever else, Ngrx for the state management, some OAuth, whatever that is, we would just have this one module and it will import everything and it will declare everything, and this will be it. And it will work, right? It will work. Our application will build, our application will run, but as it grows, of course, the bundle size will get a bit out of hand. Our startup time will be much slower. There will be a lot of more data traveling through the network, even though maybe user just wants to access only a part of this application. Plus, what not many people think about is, as we develop this application, because it's just one bundle, whenever we make a change, the build process has to rebuild everything. If it's like 3 mega, 5 mega, it has to rebuild this bundle. Every time we change one character or add the space somewhere in some file, it has to rebuild this whole thing. So, and this takes considerable amount of time as the application grows, right? So this would be like this most straightforward approach, and it can actually be the solution for very small applications because, okay, you are giving up the bundle size, you are maybe giving up a bit of build time performance, but what you are gaining is simplicity. Like you don't have to think about anything. It's just all there, it's all available. So it's a trade-off, right? But of course, as our applications grow, and not many applications are really tiny with 3 components. Usually we have some routes, we have some menus, we have services, we do backend requests, we show images, we have lists and forms and all
Hey,
these
Tomas,
kind of... Yeah.
Can you share your screen and there's a diagram in the middle of your article that you did that's really what jumped out at me that I really liked it a lot, and it goes along with what you're saying, and I think if you share it right now and then let us look at it, then we can see it, and I think it's such a good illustration of what you're talking about right now.
Okay, definitely. So
I spend a lot of time with my daughter and she's very visual, so I know that we have to have something to look at.
Makes sense. So,
and I really like that. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I think it's this one, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the screen was shared, right? Okay. So as we said, like we could have just get by. Do you see also my mouse? Or not?
Yeah, we see your mouse.
So yeah, cool. So we could just get by just like with the app module, right? But like in real applications, as they grow bigger and they have like a lot of functionality and components, basically what we want is a bit more like granular architecture. So let's look at this picture. So we start with the application. We have application. That's all what we have. And like this first best distinction we can make is what is the eager part of application and what is the lazy part. So the eager part of application is something which we need straight from the start. So this can be like some services which take care of authentication to retrieve the user if we are logged in or something like this. Also, the eager part takes care of stuff like basic layout. So maybe we show the header, maybe we show the footer, some basic menu or navigation and stuff like this. And those are all the things which have to be available from application startup. That means they also have to be present in the main bundle. So to achieve that, we usually implement this kind of code in app module and in core module. So that's just like a, how do you say, like a convention. You can call it how you want. You can call it eager module. You can call it initial module. But I think community usually goes with the name core, right? So this is the one part of application. It has to be available from start. And then there is this other part of application which doesn't need to be available from start, but it's usually displayed and used as a consequence of a user routing to some route, so clicking on some menu item or doing some interaction with the application. And Angular makes this very easy for us because now, since version 8, I think, when we want to implement such architecture and let's say we want to generate these lazy modules with its own components and services, we can just say like ng generate module and then minus route, and this is called like feature A, so we can say like minus route A, and it will generate this module with the initial component. And not only that, it will also set up its lazy loading in the main app routing module for us without need to do anything. So that's like a very cool thing about Angular, because I don't have a very good memory for this kind of things, like how do I exactly type this? So I actually don't type these things. I usually generate most of it. And this is why the article is called like how to scaffold in 10 minutes, because I'm actually not typing these things. You can generate them with a couple of commands. Yeah. So that being said, as we said, as it grows, then basically what we want to do is to put stuff in these lazy features and not in the initial stuff, not in the eager part, not in the core module. So, and the benefits of that is, as we said in the beginning, if everything was in the app module, that would mean that this main bundle is huge and the rebuilds take a long time. But if we have multiple lazy loaded modules, each of them will get its own bundle. Bundle means like a file in which it is built. And that also means that if we are changing component in the lazy feature A, only that bundle will be rebuilt, which is much smaller than the total of the whole application, right? So the rebuild time will go down. It will be much faster. And that's not only the only thing, because then, of course, because those things are isolated and lazy loaded, that means because we just did this lazy loading, it gives us some guarantees which are very nice to work with. So for example, if everything was imported in app module, you could use services from feature B in feature A and component from feature A in feature C. And that way, if you change that component, you have to be worried. Am I breaking feature C? Am I breaking feature B? Because in theory, they can be using it. But if it's lazy loaded and you would try to use component from feature A and feature B, it would lead to runtime errors, basically, because it is very well possible that feature A was already loaded because we navigated to it, but the bundle for feature B was not yet loaded. So this is kind of cool. And it leads to build time and runtime errors, which enforce clean separation between those features and their modules, which basically simplifies and way you can think about your application, because you don't have to think about the whole thing, but you can just really zoom in onto one particular part, and you have these guarantees that you are not breaking or influencing anything else. And this is like a huge benefit. And I don't think like many people are aware. Now we have this nice mosaic, the infinity mosaic, right? So yeah, I think we should like stay a bit with this topic, because again, like most people are aware about like the smaller bundle size and like faster initial load, which is nice, but there is much more to it. And people like are usually, when I spoke like with many of those teammates there, like they were not aware of these things, and they are even like, I would say, bigger benefits than like you get like loaded in 100 milliseconds faster. What do you think?
A good point there too, where you're thinking about the use cases for the code that we write and we build, right? And the ideal, like where are we building it for? When you talk about this component in feature A, the intent was that it's used for feature A, right? But without this additional architecture, planning, and thought process, it's certainly viable that somebody could come along, especially if you have a team of multiple people, and use it in feature B, not knowing that the intent was that it's only for feature A, right? So how do you, from an architecture standpoint, kind of control that and guide that in terms of the code? Same thing with the services, right? You write a service like you mentioned before, and the intent of this service is just to manage a cart. It's not to be used outside. And so how do you control that usage of it to help guide developers that come onto your team to use it in the ideal way that you plan to create them?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And that's like one of the biggest benefits of this lazy loading of those modules is that you get this for free. Because if you just try to use it somewhere else, it will just fail, which is amazing, because you don't have to like implement special checks for it or anything like this, like some code analysis. I know like maybe you heard about like the Ngrx from Narwhal, which is like a way like how to do like workspaces for monorepo. And they had to implement this because they have like many libraries. And then how do you scope like who can import who? So they had to implement this as a feature of their tool. But now here we get this kind of for free just by the virtue of that the code is not there, so it would just fail. So this is pretty nice property. Yeah. So, and what you said there is like, because this happens pretty often that like there is a component or service, and then somebody comes and they're like thinking, okay, I would actually like to use this somewhere else, and I would like to reuse this. And this is actually a very valid point. And this is something which we have to think about, like when we develop this kind of application, that, okay, we think this today, but tomorrow this can change. So how does this match this kind of architecture? How can we deal with this situation? Is that usually when we have, let's say, two sibling features, and suddenly we realize that something feature A specific we want in a feature B, we just pull it one level up. And what does the one level up mean is, if you remember in that picture, we have this like shared module next to the features. This is a module which provides us with the components which we want to use in many of those features. So we can say like we can promote this feature A component to be a shared component, and that way it's still clean architecture, and it's available.
So there's like 3 options then, the provided in root, and then like the lazy loaded only per like each feature module, and then there's like a third shared module option.
Yes, so this for root is more like for services, but you can say like there are like these core components which are eagerly loaded. So like we can put if we speak about the components, because service is a bit different, but we can then move back to that. So if we just speak about the components, pipes, and directives, which are the things which have to do with the template, so they are like the declarables because they go to the declaration array, then we have 3 options, as you said. If we need them from start, we can declare them or import them in app or core module, as you like. If they are only lazy feature specific, we can put it into that lazy feature. And if we want to reuse it across multiple lazy features, we can put it in a share module. And then the shared module in turn is imported by the multiple of those or all of those lazy features. Now, here is maybe a good place to ask ourselves, like, if this is like optimal, and it's not optimal. It will not lead to the smallest possible bundle size, because the shared module will most likely have more things so not like every lazy feature will use everything from the shared module, but this is kind of like a trade-off where we can basically try to optimize 2 things at the same time. So one is developer experience. We don't want to manage like a huge list of imports in every module and in every test for the components. But on the other hand, we also want to have like a reasonable size of the bundles. And the way I experienced it in standard applications, you can have some very special case where this will not be true, but in like reasonable applications or like some standard applications for CRUDs and forms and stuff like this, seems to be the case that the share module makes sense. This is also powered by the amazing tooling provided by the Angular CLI, which not only like includes stuff properly in these lazy features, but it kind of even tries to extract like some, how do you say, like common chunks between the features. So if you have 3 lazy features and a shared module, you may end up like with even 6 bundles, because the Angular CLI tries to do some additional optimizations to create like some virtual pre-bundles for the stuff which is shared. So this is even better actually. Right. So like this. But then what about if the application gets like even bigger? So we don't just have like a sibling lazy features, but what if like some feature gets like really big, and then we have actually like a sub lazy features, which works pretty well because you can nest it as much as you like, right? So it's like kind of like fractal structure, so you can nest it as much as you like. So like a feature A, lazy feature A, can have lazy sub feature A1 and A2 and A3, right? So what do we do there with the shared module? So yeah, okay. You can use. Yeah.
Before you get into that complexity, I just want to call out one more point that you made that's I think super important. You mentioned the developer experience, and I think that's another aspect that comes into architecture, design, and planning, right? Is not just the code that we ship and how it performs, but also the ability to maintain it and curate it over time, right? And so that's another mark that we try and hit when we talk about architecture, just like you brought up, of how do we also hit that point of making that experience something that developers will be able to understand the structure of our app, get in there and work with code and get back to the code that they haven't worked on for 3 months, but be able to ramp up and understand things just from looking at it. All those things come into play as well in terms of architecture planning.
Exactly. So that was like, yeah, that's a very important thing, because if you just try to optimize like bundle size, you would end up with like a precise but a very long list of imports, which are very hard to maintain and understand. And not only that, but like in Angular, when we test a component, we are using a test bed. And in the test bed, we usually have to provide all the things which this component is using, right? So if you have like some bigger component which like is this main container component for the page or something like this, which uses a lot of components, we would have to import lots of things in that test. So and basically in many component tests, we would have like a crazy lists. It's very easy for those lists to get out of sync. Maybe you stop using some component, then you have the dead import and stuff like this. So this gets very messy very fast. So that's another huge benefit of using like some shared modules which kind of aggregate these things which are most commonly used. So then like instead of 50 imports, you have 4. So probably it's like a shared module and then like router testing module and something very specific. So this is a very, very beneficial thing. Definitely.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, now complexity.
Yeah, because you were talking about it getting nested.
Yeah.
And then what does your shared
No, please
module
stop
do?
me because I'm passionate about these things, but we have to go in such a pace that it makes sense. Definitely. So as we said, usually it is enough, like if we have like one level of this lazy loading, so we have like multiple routes, they are sibling routes next to each other, and they are lazy, and if they have even 10 components in them, that's all right. We don't have to like go crazy on the granularity and like every component is lazy loaded. That's not beneficial, and again, would be a bad developer experience because it has its own overhead, right? So we don't go crazy, but sometimes maybe some feature get like really big. And then it would be beneficial to maybe split it up a bit to again get these benefits which we discussed previously, like isolation, faster build times, stuff like this, right? So in that case, the way it works in Angular is whenever we use routing, we can lazy load. So basically we can have also sub routes. So we have like some top main menu with some items, and then maybe one of those routes has also a side menu or some sub items. So we can lazy load modules for those sub routes and sub items. So, and what we wanted to say there is like, okay, what does this mean in relations to this main shared module, right? Because this has a lot of things in it, and we may or may not use it. And as we said, like when we want to share components between two lazy features, we pull it up in a shared module, right? So what happens if we want to share components between like sub routes? We can create like a feature shared module, something like this. So we have this main shared module which goes to feature A, B, C, and feature A has like sub routes which is like A1 and A2, and maybe there are some components which we want to share just between those two routes. So we can create a feature A shared module basically. So we kind of repeat the same structure over and over again as we get deeper, but hopefully we don't get too deep because then it's too huge. But yeah, so the main point here is that this can be repeated. So it's and the good thing about it is it's exactly the same. So once you learn it on the top level, you can apply exactly the same principles and approaches on nested levels. So that's kind of nice. And this is like one of the good things about the Angular and all this structure that it provides is that once you learn it, you can just keep like repeating it over and over again and it just makes sense.
It's basically turtles all the way down.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So what else?
So I have a question then about
please
thinking in terms like, does it come into play for us as developers or whoever's creating this architecture, right? When we think about the customer use case or the user use case and how they're using our app, like how soon should we start bringing that into play in terms of making decisions about what we lazy load? So like you mentioned feature A, and feature A has 3 different subsections that you could go to. If we understand that like most of our users are only going to go to one of the 3, is that a clear-cut thing that we'd say right off the bat, we know we're going to make all those lazy loaded because there's a chance they may never even visit them? Like how soon should we start bringing that into our thought process?
I see. So that's like a very good example which you put there. So if you already understand like the user flow very well, and you know that this is like a specific use case which only some subset of users will need and the other ones, so that's like a very strong signal to do the lazy loading. On the other hand, I would say like today with Angular 8 Plus, it is so extremely cheap to do lazy loading in Angular, basically running one command, that I usually start with lazy loading like whenever I have a navigation, whenever I do the routing, I do the lazy loading, because there is like almost zero penalty to it.
So
I
it's
usually,
like no matter how small the app, you just go ahead and do it.
if it has navigation, because some applications don't have navigation, but if you have a navigation, and if navigation makes sense for your app, so just don't try to introduce navigation just to do lazy loading, because I've seen that too. So don't do that. But if your application has like a real navigation with some real menu or like some real steps or some real flow, then I don't see any reason not to use it on the top level routes. Because let's say you have 5 routes, and then of course, when you come to application, you have to show at least one, right? So there is some default view. It's welcome page, it's home, it's whatever, is the dashboard. But yeah, then okay, so you just load that one initially together with all the other JavaScript files which are loading anyway. So there is like almost zero penalty to that. But the good thing about this is, if you are starting on some other route, you only get that one and not this initial one. Because I've seen people saying like, okay, this is the dashboard, this can be like eagerly loaded from start because it's like the default route or something, but there is almost like no penalty to actually make it lazy too, so why not? And it kind of simplifies in that way that then all the features are the same. They are all like lazy loaded, so it's always like the same approach. So that way the eager part is on like this main layout and like authentication and like some navigation and stuff like this, I would say.
So we just had a question in the YouTube chat I was about to ask the same question, so they asked it too. What about like a preloading strategy, right? In terms of saying you still create your features as separate segments that you could either lazy load, but you could also do a preloading strategy where you say it's not blocking the first part, but yet we know they're going to get to it, so let's make it happen in the background.
Definitely, that's a very good point. So Angular actually has like a built-in mechanism for that. Like I think you have to like implement like some interface and some tokens, so and provide it like into the dependency injection with some token, so you can either use preloading strategies provided out of the box, or you can even implement your own custom preloading strategy. So if we speak about those like provided out of the box, I think there is just like preload all or something like this, if I remember correctly, which should basically trigger loading of those bundles if the thread is idle or something like this. I think I tried to use it in my like personal website, which is also built in Angular, and my experience was that it was kind of slowing it down in some way. At least that was like my subjective impression, maybe in that particular architecture. So probably I would go with like something custom which waits a little bit longer in the beginning, because maybe then the thread is like free for 10 milliseconds. Okay, let's load everything, like 20 routes, no problem. But you are actually try to loading like some data through the REST, and like for example, Chrome will only let 6 requests at the time, and then suddenly you have like a problem, as far as I understand. So probably like something custom. And here we can even mention something which I like seen before, which is from Minko Genhe, or how do you pronounce it properly, which is called like Guess.js or something like this, which you can integrate if you have like a public app which it's on the internet, or if you're like using Google Analytics, let's say, you can basically export the data from Google Analytics to see the real life behavior of your users. And based on that, there is like some module which can process this data and get you like the preloading strategy based on that. So it will, it's basically depending on the real life behavior of users, which can change over time. And this is how your preloading strategy will also evolve, just to preload the most likely bundle where user used to navigate. So there are many ways. And from very simple one, okay, let's get everything now, to like, okay, let's do machine learning of the user behavior on the Google Analytics and get the best possible preloading strategy ever. So but that's the cool thing. You have the options, right? You have the options for what you need.
I got to say, I'm really excited because here's another great example that we can use to kind of drive home this concept, right? By taking this approach to breaking up our modules into features, we've, from that architecture, allowed all these possibilities, allowed lazy loading, allowed preloading strategy. If we were to architect just one ng module, we would be locked out of that potential, right? So maybe we're not using it right now, but because of that architecture strategy we put in place now for the separate ones, we've unlocked the ability to get to that with less effort in the future when we need to do that. And that's one of those keys to like making those decisions early on, right?
That's a very good point. Like, it's always great to do things which are kind of like cheap to do in terms of time because we are supported by the tooling. So, okay, I run one command and I have a lazy module. I didn't have to do anything basically. And it gives me like options down the road. So that's like, whenever you can get a lot for a little, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you, right? It's really like this. And who knows, like in the future, what kind of features are coming, like in the Angular world now when the IB is finished, so the team can focus on other things, like for improvements and actually shipping new features. Who knows what kind of optimizations will be unlocked? So if you just like start doing it like in a right way from the start, who knows? Rightish.
So you mentioned earlier like Angular material and looking at that as an example, right? And I know, and I haven't looked at it recently, but I know there was a point at which they would have individual components have their own ng modules. So the fact that you could pick and choose what components, you don't get a module with 15 components, you could granular get it down to just what you need. Is that strategy still in play? And how does that come into play in terms of like, should we be thinking about from an architecture standpoint, doing something similar?
This is a very good question. So, and it plays very well to what we have been discussing. So Angular material still exposes or provides its component as a standalone modules. That means you have to import that module which has this component. For example, if you want to use material button, you have to import material button module. In every module in which you have components which want to use that button. So let's repeat that. If I have a feature A, and in feature A, I have a feature A component, and in that component template, I would like to use a material button. That material button has to be part of that module because it's kind of like a context for that its own component. That means I have to import a material button module in a feature A module. But here comes this distinction that like, okay, that's the one option. I import it directly. The other option is to import it in a shared module plus also export it and only import the shared module in the feature A. So, and this is this trade-off which we mentioned before, that we don't want to maintain like these very large lists of imports. So yeah, the first, like the smallest bundle size would be if we had the explicit list of material module imports in every feature. And this would lead to smallest bundle. So if I use only button, there will be only button. And if I use only input, there will be only input. But this is very rarely the case, because if in multiple features I have forms, then probably I need the inputs, selects, buttons, forms, form fields in all of them. So probably it's better. So it is better developer experience to only import shared module than all of them. And we are not losing that much of like a bundle size optimization because most of them use most of those things. But what about something like, let's say we use Angular material and there is like this navigation and like this view container or whatever it's called, right? So like this for this main layout. So those are the things which are actually not really used in lazy features. That's something which gives you like this main layout with the sidebar, which is like then hidden when it's like on the small screen and so on and so on. So where would you import that, right? So probably not in the shared module because this is for the lazy feature. So that's a great example of something which would be imported in a core or app module because it's needed from start. It shows this main layout, and also it's used only there actually. It's only used to display the main layout. So it's most likely in a app component template. So that was a very, very good example. So to recapitulate, the components which we use often and in many lazy features like button, form field, input, select, and stuff like this, we should most likely import in a shared module, which is then imported in the lazy features. And then the specific stuff like this view container and side now and stuff like this, which is used only rarely and is only needed for this main layout, we should import, let's say, in app module or in our core module. Now, the third possibility would be something heavy, like material table, which is pretty large, has a lot of directives, a lot of components and something like this. If we only use it in one feature, it's still worth it to only import in that one feature instead of the share module, right? Again, it will not hurt you so much to put it in shared, but that's something which you could consider as optimization if you only need it in one, right? So I think that was like a very, very good real life example of that. Thank you for that. And this will also be the case if you are like in your own organization, which is like some component library, hopefully it's tree shakeable, then you can basically follow exactly the same guidelines, right?
Yeah, and it's having that ability to compose together what you need, right? So the small enough chunks allows us as developers for our particular instance to put together that grouping that fits for our thing rather than taking all of that. Yeah, for sure. So I've got another question for you in terms of experience with working with these different teams and larger enterprise applications and things like that. There's definitely this, I think, this period where applications can benefit from some time thrown at it for architecture, even with like new features coming in. You say you got a request from the product owners for new feature Z coming in. How do you see teams, like, do they, let's say they're doing like a Scrum or Agile or something like that, do they work in and say, okay, first we're going to do this level of work, which is just architecture, design, and planning, and then we move to the implementation? Or do you see a lot of times that the architecture is done at the same time the implementation is done, right? And the potential pitfalls or challenges with that?
So I would say, like, at least what I've seen, of course, this is not universal. People just like do. They just like do. And then there are like these couple of exceptions, which are like, okay, wait a second. Like, let's take a step back. Let's maybe write some simple diagram with some boxes on the paper. But I would, and even me actually, sometimes I'm like, hey, okay, let's just do. But then like, hey, wait a second. So actually, this even happened today. I told you like maybe that we are like developing like this new component framework with my colleague, Kevin. And I was like, okay, let's do a split button. Let's just do it. And then like, wait a second, like, how do we do like this wrapper form field around it? How about the validation? How about the translations for the validation? How about like, we actually have to have an info message? And then it turned out into like a 2-hour remote call with like pseudocode in an editor where we are just like trying to document all the possible cases until we got something which actually can cover it. But it almost happened that like, okay, I have a split button. Yeah, great. But like, how do we integrate it with the rest of the stuff? So it's very easy to forget about this. It's very easy, but it's a very good point.
Yeah, I think especially because we talk about having these schematics and things that make it real easy for us to create a new module or a new component, right? But then did we create that in the right spot? And right. And then like, if we need to move that, like what do we need to go through to do that? Right. And especially when we start using it and kind of coupling ourselves to it, then the move of that, the restructure of that becomes a little more painful, a little more time consuming and effort. Right. So can you do that work up front, so that this is where I want this thing to land, right? And I got an understanding, or these are the components I need to move into that shared because this is how I thought about it as a whole versus just diving right in and implementing it and then moving things around afterwards, right? Which can be challenging.
It's like this saying, like you should measure twice and like once cut or something. So maybe you should sketch twice and one generate or something like that for the modern age. Because it's just so easy to generate stuff. Like once you get used to schematics, you can have like 5 modules and 10 components and 3 services like in 50 seconds. Like it's crazy. But yeah, maybe the paper and the pen or whatever, whiteboard, whatever you like, maybe it is the way.
I would say after years of consulting, the one thing that's the most expensive, tedious, time-consuming to fix, and such a common mistake, is when people start building and the app grows and grows and grows, and they just keep putting all of the code into one module, and you can't tree shake anything, and you can't lazy load anything, and then they want to go back later and add tree shaking and lazy loading, and it's really... everything is now all in one module and everything depends on everything else and everything imports everything else and it's a mess. And it's very difficult to go back later and take that all after you've built it all. It's really a pain and it's expensive. So if you really keep it all to all these different modules, and that's what I was saying in the chat is going crazy. They're asking me all kinds of questions. I'm trying to answer them all and they're really good questions. But I always say Angular Material is a beautiful example of the right way to do tree shaking. And even sometimes I'm not sure how, and provided in root or how this is supposed to be done. And I always just go straight to the GitHub for Angular material and look at how they're importing everything and how they're handling everything. Because this is the beauty of it, is you have this whole Angular material, right? And you only take what you need. And the way that they've structured it is just very, very simple. So if you do yours like that, then, you have all these different modules and you can take things from shared, but you're not taking the whole entire shared module. You're just tree shaking what you need out of there. And it's very important to do that right. Because if you have everything in one big massive module, then you can't use anything out of that module unless you take all of it. And that's exactly what you want to avoid. And that's why you want to do tree shaking. So if you're not sure exactly about the syntax, because I don't memorize everything, right? I have to go look stuff up all the time. But Angular material, like I said, is such a good resource for that.
That's exactly right. And what Bonnie said there is like, it even gets like deeper because we are speaking like about the application, but once we add the libraries to that mix, so if you have like a big organization and libraries, it's even more important to do this right, because if like multiple applications in your organization is using the library, then it's like a much higher possibility of introducing problem for many people. So you really want to make sure to make this right. And we had like a lot of real life experiences of this when it was not right. And maybe we can say about this a little bit that, okay, so first of all, since Angular 6, so it's already quite some time, we have this provided in root, which is amazing, because since that point of time, whenever we have a library, we can put all the services provided in root and never put them in any module in that library, and it will just work. So this is already magical, and it will just work. It's how it's supposed to be. So this is amazing. So that means if we have a library, the only time we need components is to make available for the consumers, for the other developers, the components, pipes, and directives, which are like the declarations which deal with the template. And there we have to take, as Bonnie said, like the inspiration from the Angular material. Well, we don't have to, but we can and we should. That it's a good practice to really chunk it like one by one, or like really things which belong together. So if we have like some special card component which has a card title and card content and card avatar and card picture and whatever, this should be like one module, right? But probably the button doesn't belong there. So it's like this. So it's not like if we have like, if we have a card and we want to use like my organization card, I would not like to import 5 modules just to do that. So like, so all these 5 components which belong to card, they should come together. But if you have like different things, it's good to chunk it into sub-module. And this is something which again is made very easy for us with the Angular, which is again amazing, because Angular uses this thing called ng-packager. And this is like a part of the build process for the libraries. And basically it enables us to create like these sub-modules and sub-chunks in the library just by introducing in a folder like public API TS and package.json file. And everything will be automated. You just got like a standalone chunk in your library. So that's, again, it's very amazing. It's like 1 page of documentation, but literally you have to create 2 files in a folder, and suddenly you can just import from your library only 1 module and nothing else. And this is pretty amazing. So it's like this recurring topic in the Angular world that they really make it easy for you to do the right thing.
For sure. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so I guess we need to wrap it up. Before we get in, we'll do some picks here in a second, but before we get in, any last comments on anything I want to in terms of architecture, or think we got it? Bonnie.
Oh, sorry. We had one last question in the chat because somebody was asking, Tomas, you mentioned your website, that you had some code on a website, and they want to know where they can find it. You can't just tease it like that and not tell us where your website is.
Oh, Tomas, I think you're muted now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, right. So I think it's public on GitHub. I have to check, but like it's basic, like as you see, like my name here on the screen, like tomastrajan.com, and maybe I will check, and I can then add it maybe like to description of the video or something. So I mean, it can be public because I mean it's a public website, and if you find the bugs or fixed typos, I'm just happy. And besides that, it's just basic. a website where I say what I do and like stuff like this. So it's just like presentation website for me, but it's built with Angular. It does server-side rendering for the SEO, or how do you pronounce it? So because it's like marketing, and it also has a lot of lazy loaded features. And I know there is a bug like with the rendering when the whole content jumps a bit, but whatever. Anyway, so okay, I will provide the link.
Perfect. Yeah. And you can tweet it at us and we'll retweet it and we'll get it out there. Make sure everybody has it and stuff. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's do a couple picks and then we'll call it a day. I didn't check with our panels. Did any of our panelists have any picks today? Bonnie does. All right, Bonnie, go ahead.
I have 2 picks, but they're really quick. One, I have to pick I know I've done this before, but we had a really great group in the chat tonight, and they were asking me a lot of questions. And it might not seem like I was paying attention to Tomas, but I was trying to keep up with all the questions in the chat, and there were some very good questions. So kudos to all of you. I really like the questions in the chat. And my second pick is a website that I just saw today. It's called Stay the F Home, except it's not, I'm not going to say, the whole thing on AngularAir. But really, Florian Reifschneider, who I think is NG Frankfurt. Shout out to Florian at NG Frankfurt, because I really love this website and I think that you guys should go check it out. I don't want to get into coronavirus. We don't have time right now, but go look at that website. I think it's really valuable right now.
Stay safe.
Yeah.
That was one of my 2 picks, was just stay healthy, everybody. I had 2 flus, 2 different versions of the flu back to back these last 2 weeks, topped off by an ear infection. So
Bless your
Was it the flu?
You sound bad.
it was the flu twice in a row.
I hope you're okay. Well, there are 3 things that they say, and it's not, it's not to be like freaking out or anything, but just common sense. The 3 things: wash your hands, don't touch your face, and avoid social gatherings. So if we all do those things just for, a couple weeks, then it's going to die out and then we'll get back to normal very quickly, hopefully.
Yeah, my pick was stay healthy, everybody. Please take care of yourself. And I have an old article, but it was updated for the latest version of Angular. And I was like nerding out, showing my husband, and he's like, yeah, like this is kind of old news. I don't know why you're so excited about it. So like if you're in that camp, you can stay on that side. But it's by Corey Ryland, called Angular Multiple HTTP Requests with RxJS. And I was actually struggling with like how to chain things and make it clean. And I don't know, I really like this article. So I'll tweet the link out and put it in the chat.
I love Corey Ryland. I think that we should have him come on and talk about that, because I really miss Corey Ryland. I haven't talked to him in forever, and I love Corey Ryland.
I was like, look, Zach, you can do like this call inside of that one, and you're using both pieces of data. And he's like, this is like as old as time. And I'm like, you're done.
I love him. I love the chat. Fergus said one flew over the Nichols nest. I love it. And Guadadev, I don't know how to say that. Guadadev's pick is Angular Ngrx Material Starter by Tomas Trajan.
Well, let's just transition then into Tomas's picks, because I think he's going to pick that, right?
Okay, so the one which Bonnie mentioned with somebody from chat, thank you for the shout out. So there is like this Angular Ngrx Material Starter project on GitHub, like at Tomas Trajan, and you can find it there. So this was created like at version 5, like a long time ago, and it's still being kept up to date. So currently it's version 9 with Ngrx 9. And it basically shows you how to use also this architecture, how to use Ngrx, how to use custom material teams, many things, many goodies. So I've seen people like taking it and building like applications on top of that. It also has like Angular animation, so you can really take an inspiration and like build your own stuff on top of that. So thank you for the shout out from the chat. Besides that, I would like to pick in Angular 9, now we have this provided in platform, so not just in the root, but in platform. And this is a very epic feature because it enables us to share services between multiple applications on a single page, Angular applications. And why would you need that? With Angular elements, right? So you have now a way to share like some core services like logging and interceptors and stuff like this between multiple Angular applications on a single page, which means you have a main application which can consume elements, and like the infrastructure you can now share easily. And speaking about that, last thing I would like to mention is check out my library called Angular minus extension / elements, which is basically a library which enables you to lazy load and consume Angular elements or any other web component. So build with Stencil, Polymer, whatever. If it's a web component, it enables you to consume web components in your Angular applications in a very nice way. So first of all, it's lazy loaded. It's very granular. So it will only load when you render it. So that means if it's behind the ngIf, it doesn't load until you show it. And it also supports you to use standard Angular template binding. So you can literally do like these square brackets or like round brackets for clicks or whatever it is on those lazy loaded web components, the same way as you would do on standard Angular components. So I highly recommend to check it out together. Like now it's even like the best combo with this provided in platform.
Very cool. Very cool. Definitely need to check that out. All right, we'll include that link as well. We'll tweet that out.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Hey, Tomas, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your expertise on this topic. We really appreciate you coming on the show and informing us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time. It was amazing hosts, also like a lot of fun. So hope to do this sometimes again.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We'll pick another topic and we'll have you back on for sure.
Yay.
Awesome. Thanks again. That's a wrap. Everyone have a good one and we will catch you next time.